I don't know who these people are that keep saying Black women don't support each other. Because I'm like, you made that up. Whoever you are, you made that up. Welcome to another episode of Offstage with Michelle Lang Raymond. I am she, and these are conversations with regular people doing extraordinary things, which by default makes them extraordinary people. Today, my guest is the Reverend almost Dr. Yolanda Norton, creator of the Beyonce Mass. The Beyonce Mass is coming to Seattle, Washington on May 6th, 2022, this year of our Lord and Savior. Welcome, my sister. How are you?
I'm well. I'm glad to be with you, if only virtually today.
So tell the people where you are zooming in from.
I'm zooming in from Lisbon, Portugal, which is one of the home bases for the Beyonce Mass. Yeah, living my best life in Portugal right now.
Now I want to jump into the Beyonce Mass that's coming to Seattle, but I need to tell the people a little bit about you. Yolanda Norton is a doctoral student in Hebrew, Bible, and Ancient Israel. She has a BA in political science from Syracuse University and an MDiv and MTS from Wesley Theological. Prior to going to Vanderbilt University, Yolanda served in various ministry capacities, including campus pastor, children's pastor at churches in Washington, D.C., and the metropolitan area. Before entering into ministry, you worked in public policy, focusing on children's policy and creating more sustainable systems for families and families with low income. Your research includes, and I think this is what we're going to circle around today, says womanist interpretation, narrative and literary criticism, and how each text treats foreign women. You're interested in ways in which these insider-outsider paradigms influence constructions of identity such that they vilify and or subjugate women of color who encounter the biblical canon in the modern world. Does that sound like you?
That sounds familiar.
And before we talk about what the Beyonce Mass is and why people, particularly people of color in Seattle, should come, I want to just know why you created it in the first place. We'll get to what it is and what the experience is like, but I just want to know, why did you create it in the first place? What's the origin story?
Well, there's so many origin stories to it. So the simplest origin story is I wanted to create the thing that I had always wanted in an ecclesial and a church space. You know, when you become, as you're becoming a scholar, one of the things that people say to you is let the questions of your life guide you into your research. And so as a biblical scholar who has secondary research interests in ethics, in womanist ethics, and in homiletics and liturgics, I'm just interested in how it is popular culture intersects with critical race theory, with biblical studies in ways that inform my identity. And so that's really what led me into the construction of the Beyonce and the Hebrew Bible class, and therefore into the construction of the Beyonce Mass.
Yeah, I mean, so powerful. Anybody that knows me knows that when I first started my music career, so to speak, I would take secular songs and I would rewrite them, because there were some themes that existed in secular songs that I still felt were pertinent to my spirituality, right? That were relevant to my faith. At first, people were like, "Can you do that?" And I'm like, "I'm gonna do it. I don't know if you can do it. I'm gonna do it." And
well, clearly you can, because I'm gonna.
Right, and people who want to hear it will listen to it, and people who don't. I'm a church mutt, I call myself. I don't let nobody else call me that, but I'm kind of a church mutt where I come from so many different denominations that I was like, I'm not beholden to any one thing so much that I can't flex. Matter of fact, I remember one time I used Jagged Edge's I Wanna Be the one you love, right? Baby, I want to be the one you touch, right? I use that song as a worship song. And I was like, how does this not, if I'm a believer, if I'm a Christian, how do I not hear a call from Jesus on this? So yeah, there's this space where people have refused to go. And I love that you're saying, that it all belongs to God anyway. So tell us the logistics of when you're going to be in town and where and what to expect and all that.
So we're going to be at St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral in Seattle, where it's 7 p.m. May 6th. You do have to register in advance. And registration is free. We never charge for a mass. We don't take an offering.
Like, you exist in the academic space, and so you talk and think about this stuff all the time. But I think some of the stuff that you're talking about is new for people, and sometimes people can't get with something if it's too new, especially when it relates to their Jesus or to their God. Right. So womanist theology. Talk to us about what womanist theology is and why it's been important for you to move the Black woman's voice to the center of spiritual conversations.
So I think too often Black women become the backbone for institutions, including the church, without being celebrated and nourished in those spaces. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the Beyonce Mass and my work in womanist theology is really about learning to appreciate how God is wrapped up in Black women's identities. Mm-hmm. And so, this term womanist really is concretized by Alice Walker in the late 70s, early 80s. She called herself, she had up until that point called herself a feminist. And then she said, if I'm a part of a movement and I have to qualify it with my Blackness, I've already named that space hasn't made room for me. Right? So she was naming her being marginalized within the feminist movement. And so she harkened back to that kind of old Black Southern terminology of when, Black girls are acting too grown for their age. And then grandma would be like, you acting womanish, you being grown now, right? And so that's where this term womanist comes from. And the way that she just creates this full definition, talking about how Black women love everybody, how we nourish folks, how we believe in tears as a counterbalance for laughter, how we can have a range of emotions, how we interrogate questions differently because of how we see the world. That's like, when I first learned about womanist theology, I felt set free and I felt lied to. I felt like the church had lied to me my whole life. The world had lied to me my whole life. And all of a sudden, someone had given me a truth about myself.
Yeah. It's so funny because I'm going to step in some controversial waters for a second. People pick and choose where Black women have power. Exactly. Right? So, like, I know you're all the way over there in Lisbon, but, we had a thing a few days ago, at the Oscars where Will Smith, had a moment. So much of the consequent conversation has been about whether, what Jada's power is in this situation. Like, she had the power to stop it, or she had the power to blah, 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 or she's so disrespectful and she has that power, or Jada has no power at all. Will did what he wants to do. And I think, I don't want to get into that. I'm just using that to say people are really sometimey about when Black women have power. So one day they got all the power in the world and the next day they don't got no power. And I just find it interesting in the context in which you're speaking about Black church, that people pick and choose, when to, when to engage Black women's power. Black people in particular, can be really protective, of their church spaces and their faith spaces, right? Whether it be the building or their ideas. Or I remember an episode of Good Times where little Mike brought home a picture of Black Jesus, and they had a fallout about they weren't gonna put no Black Jesus on their wall because that ain't what they were used to, that ain't what they were born with, that ain't what they grew up knowing, and this idea that you could have a different visual of their centerpiece of the faith. They were like, nah, we're not getting with that. And so people can be really protective of those spaces, of those Black spaces and of those faith spaces. And I would imagine the Beyonce Mass really kicks against that protectiveness that people have. How has that, what do you say to that?
my question is, what are you protecting? Right? And people's pushback of the mass is like, my question of interrogation is, what is it that you're really protecting, right? Because we're clear. We're not worshiping Beyonce. We worship God. We call on the name of Jesus. We do communion. We have call to worship. All of the things that are a part of what we would call an Orthodox Christian worship service, a traditional Christian worship service, are embedded in this particular worship service. So the question becomes, are you protecting an idolatry of white supremacy? Are you protecting your patriarchy? The Black church, for me, has always integrated quote unquote secular music, right? Like, so when I constructed this project, nothing felt particularly odd to me because I've been in worship services. Little Temptation, little, right? Like,
girl, the musicians in Black church be playing secular music all the time.
And for me, as long as Black women are still coming, Black girls and Black women are still coming up to me and saying, I needed this, we'll keep doing this work. For me, as long as people from across different races, ages, gender identities, ethnicities keep saying things like, we had somebody wrote an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, an op-ed, and they said they'd given up on God because they'd given up on the church. Because they'd come out as gay and they'd been ostracized by the church. So they'd given up on God. The title of the op-ed was, I Found God at a Beyonce Mass.
Yeah.
And the young man who wrote it said, I went to this mass, I found healing. I'll never give up on God again. I'll never go back to church, but I'll never give up on God again. So as long as that's the testimony, you are welcome to think, say, believe what you want to say about this work. I'll keep going.
You'll keep going. And you should. I don't know if you remember a group called Sweet Honey in the Rock. Do you know who that is?
I love Sweet Honey.
My mom, look, girl, look. My mom, when I was a little girl, my mom took me to see Sweet Honey in the Rock. And it was likewise, right, a spiritual experience. And I was a little kid. I was a kid. But something about the fusion of art and faith and freedom and being connected to the higher being, right? Something about it felt like church, but also felt different from church in a way that even as a little girl, I remember so many people feeling close to God in those spaces, right? In those spaces that the church would probably not endorse, right? And I think the same thing probably happens. I'm excited. I've never been to one, so I'm excited just to come have the experience myself. I'm not producing it. I'm not producing it. Acts on Stage is not producing it. We're just coming to be a part. And I think what you're doing with the Beyonce Mass is reminiscent of things like Sweet Honey in the Rock and other spaces where it's not. Well, here's the thing. I was gonna say Sweet Honey in the Rock is not exactly church, but it feels like church. But the Beyonce Mass actually is a worship service.
Yeah,
it actually is. It just decenters patriarchy and decenters whiteness. How are you feeling about bringing this experience to Seattle? Seattle is a different place, on the map, period. It's a different place in Blackness, quite frankly. But how are you feeling about bringing the Mass to Seattle?
Yeah, so for me, there's all kinds of opportunity and excitement about coming to Seattle and engaging in the community. And because our work in Seattle will continue past the Mass, it's really great for me to continue to think about building community and coalition on behalf of Black girls and Black women.
Nice. I was somewhere yesterday and somebody was talking about that they had heard someone say once that like places like LA have a lot of Black people, but Seattle actually has a Black community. And we've been stretched and strained, especially geographically. We've been stretched and strained, but I agree with that sentiment. that there is a Black community here. And we are really hoping and wanting and inviting that Black community to come see and support this Beyonce Mass, whether you're a church person or not, whether you're a Beyonce fan or not, come and just sort of have a moment, right? Come and have a moment with each other, right? Come connect this way, but also come connect that way. And the last thing we need to talk about is the day after the Mass, you actually have a panel. And we are going to host that panel here at Offstage Theater. But tell us a little bit about why you do a post-Mass panel.
And we've done our level best to try to always have a panel and a conversation in the city. One, to talk about like, what's this thing that you may have just seen, but also, you know, people come to that conversation who may not have been at the Mass, because part of what we're going to talk about is the themes and issues that popped up around observations in the city that helped me construct the liturgy of the Mass. Like what's happening in Seattle, particularly around Black women, that facilitate some of the conversation that we're having in the Mass.
And so you get to sort of slow the conversation down at a panel and have that talk. Well, we're excited. We're honored to host that and excited to be a part in that way. And so we just look forward to it. So again, we want to make sure everybody knows the Beyonce Mass is coming to town. That town is Seattle, May 6th, 2022 at the St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Registration is free, but registration is required. And then the next day we get to have a panel and talk all about it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, you know, I always love to hear people say they're excited about coming to the Mass, having this experience. For you, what are you anticipating? What piques your interest? What energizes you about the possibility of the Mass coming to Seattle and being present in that space?
One thing that's compelling to me is to know that something that has graced, you know, the stages of the Kennedy Center and been written about in the New York Times and traveled literally all over the world is also coming to the Pacific Northwest, coming to a place where people don't really think about Blackness and don't think about Black community. And a Black woman has created a thing that is so in line with the heart of my work, which is Blackness, faith, and art. And I'm like, how is that not a win for me, but also not a win for our city? Or Acts on Stage exists for people of color and creatives of faith. And so I feel like the Mass is exactly at the intersection where we live. And I'm just super excited. One of the things that's also true about the Pacific Northwest is it's called one of the most unchurched cities or areas in the country. And so I just think things like the Beyonce Mass create space and create an opportunity for us to engage that part of who we are in a way that might be more palatable for people. And so that's what excites me about it. When we first connected, you called because you needed to do some interviews, you know, with Black women in this area, and like you talked about. And when I tell you, I called some pretty heavy hitter Black women to come do that interview. Some women who are making moves in this city, who are doing amazing things in the city. Quite frankly, Black women who are busy. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they said, I will stop what I'm doing to come do this, said a lot to me about how important it is to move Black women's voices to the center of the conversation, not just the center of any conversation, but the center of faith conversation. That said a lot to me about how important it is for the Beyonce Mass to be in Seattle. So that's what compels me and is compelling me to be a part of what you're doing. So looking forward to seeing you here and us having an incredible time in worship, honestly.
Looking forward to being there.
And you know what I love about this interview too, is how little we actually talk about Beyonce.
There you have it.
Just saying.
That's it.
Just saying.
That's it.
Did you